Nerd Night, American Race Riots, Our National Sport.
You guys, race riots are rough, man. I was talking to my son about this presentation, and he was like, Mom, are you sure? And I'm like, no, it'll be fine, it'll be funny. And he was like, I'm not going to that with you. So let me tell you why, right? So, I majored in history in college. I'm a big history nerd. I had a whole separate project where I interpreted every U.S. president as a cupcake, and I had to fill the president-shaped hole in my heart with something. And I had been thinking about race riots in the past, right? Because you take a lot of history classes, you hear about all the different race riots, you hear about two in Detroit, and I'm like, man, there are cycles with this sort of thing. I should do something with that one day. And then I was like, we don't do that anymore. Rioting, because that's a bad idea. And then Ferguson happened, and I was like, oh, we still do this. And then we talk about it in weird ways. We're like, hey, these bad people, you choose a side, right? Like, your bad people, my bad people might not be the same bad people, but we choose a side, and we're like, let me construct the narrative based on my very carefully curated thing. And I was like, no history major will accept that. What I will do is I will learn, and I will have a website where I talk about what I learn, and I will find every black, white race riot in U.S. history, and I will learn about them all and the individual stories, and it will be great. And that was insane. So I was like, when you have a kid, the benefit of that is you get to test all sorts of shit out on them. So I was like, son, hey, look. And then he saw this slide, and he stopped what he was doing, and he looked at me like, and I was like, son, you are looking at me like you think I'm going to get up on a public stage and use a certain word that we do not use. And he just looked at me like, I was like, even though I encounter it in my research, I don't use it on my website, I'm not using it here tonight. I am just going to use his convention of using humor to talk about hurtful truths. And he looked at me like, how dare you compare yourself to a one Richard Pryor? And I was like, you've been hitting the YouTube too hard, and I should do something about the wireless situation. So what we're looking at here is probably what most of us think about when we think about race riots, right? You're like, all right, there's a crowd, there's some angry looking people, and I actually did take a mic to the mouth, Sarah, you cursed to me. That's okay. You see some police, you see some throngs, you see some rubble, a little fire, maybe some light looting. But that's not the whole story. I like to think about that as like the MVP of riots. That's your Detroit, your Watts, your Rodney King riots, those sorts of things. But these are like your LeBron James of riots, your Steph Currys, your Kobe Bryants. But there's a deeper field. There's your Bill Laimbeer. And see, the only reason that joke landed is because we're in Michigan, because place matters when we're talking about communal memory, right? When's the last time you thought about Detlef Schrempf, right? But that happens. Tulsa, 1921, big riot, kind of famous. That's kind of like your Julius Erving of riots, right? But when you think about sports, and I should have warned you, I love to mix a metaphor. I'm a metaphor mixologist. When you think about it, there's a much deeper bench, right? There are those players you never think about, and there are a shitload of them, right? So when I'm talking about what's happening, just remember, I've kind of picked out some MVPs. So please, allow me to be your Vanna White of race riots. So, someone sounded scared. So, as I said, I majored in history in college, right? And I took a lot of U.S. history classes. And when you take a lot of history classes in the same region, especially in a country that has a short history, you kind of cover the same material a lot. I certainly did. And, there are certain topics that kind of get treated as the black topics. And when you're taking American history classes, black history goes like this. Once, there was slavery. And then came Abraham Lincoln. And it was gone. Then we had World War I, World War II, the Depression came in between, Martin Luther King, civil rights, things were looking good. And then those bad blacks came, and they rioted, and then we got Richard Nixon and everything that came after. And that's kind of like how it goes, right? And I felt like, I feel like there's more to the story, and I feel like there are a lot of stories, but when you're trying to study a big thing, things get lost, right? So what I want to talk about is like what I'm talking about when I talk about a race riot, right? So for my purposes for the project, for the research that I've been doing, I look at a race riot as violence that happens between two different racial groups in a community. And I've chosen to focus on black-white race riots because I had to draw the line somewhere, because we had a lot more. And you know, we think about like racial violence in a certain way. Like we're like, yo, that's bad. And again, we think about like these MVP riots, and then we kind of think about like Dr. King's movement as sort of like an alternative, right, to some of the more, some of the things that came afterwards. But I wanted to share a quote from an interview that he did with Mike Wallace, where he says, where basically he's like, yo, and he said that, right? He was like, yo. You know, he had that fine mustache, real tightly groomed. He was like, yo, a riot is the language of the unheard, right? And so you think about, you know, I like to think about it like this. Who here has had a shitty job? Anyone? Who here has worked a shitty job and felt kind of taken advantage of? Who has done some things at that shitty job that maybe you shouldn't do? Now think about that when you think about race riots, right? So like, what if you live in a shitty neighborhood with shitty job prospects and shitty things happen from the police, and you have shitty medical care and shitty everything else and no positive outlook? Might you do some things? Maybe. I mean, I just like to think about what things, like I'm a nonviolent person. I've never been in a fight. I use my words behind your back, right? Like, I'm not a pro-violence person, but I just try to inhabit the point of view of someone who may have engaged in some of these activities. Speaking of using my words, I think that language is super important, right? There are some things that we call riots, and there are other things that we call something else, right? We don't call the Boston Tea Party the Boston Tea Riot, right? And we think about like the riots that we think of as bad riots. We think like these people, they have looted, they have set fires. And there's like, sometimes you read about riots, you hear about like a commodity riot, and that's like a riot that's sort of the ones that you think about, like against businesses and things like that. And there's a communal riot, which is a riot that you're thinking about as like people have banded together against a cause that has a purpose, right? We do not call the Boston Tea Party a riot, but we could think about it as a commodity riot because they stole the tea and did away with it. We do not think about Shays Rebellion as a riot. I just wanted you to think about language. The Boston Massacre, we don't think about that as a riot. And sometimes also when you hear about the '67 Detroit riot, you'll hear people using other terms. But for my purposes, because I think that these things are all relatives, I think it's kind of important to think about them within the same family of activity. People have decided together that violence is the thing that's going to happen, or destruction is the thing that's going to happen, and they're related to each other. And I think that there are certain lessons that we have when we think about it as if it's in the continuum that it is. That's how many riots are on my list. That's a lot of riots. People were mad. People still are mad. And then this list is incomplete. Actually, when I was kind of like getting my notes together to get ready for you guys tonight, I found like 4 more riots, but I had already made the slide, and it was like, it has to stop. It has to stop. And there are certain occasions where I know I don't have all the riots. So for example, when Dr. King was shot, riots broke out all across the country. And I just kind of have like a placeholder for that. Because I was just like, I will spend my entire research project looking for the riots, and I won't ever like get into the meat of the material I was looking for. Another instance of like a million riots all over the place is when Jack Johnson won the heavyweight title. People were like, no, it couldn't be. What happened to the Great White Hope? I feel hopeless. And that's what people do when they feel hopeless. They riot. Anyone recognize her? All right. My son was scared someone was going to say Bruno Mars, and I was like, I have more. And I have more faith in humanity than he does, which scares me. But had one of you said it, I would have lied to him, I'm telling you. But the reason why I have her today up on the slide is because there is a definite thin line between lynching and race riots, right? She's up here because she led the crusade about trying to eliminate lynchings as a thing that happened. In the late 1800s, there were about 104 lynchings happening every year. And there is a really thin line between these two things. In fact, with some of the race riots that I've researched, it's like, oh, it was a riot, and then it was a lynching, or there was a mob that people were afraid was going to turn into a lynching, so a bunch of people showed up, and then the other people showed up, and where's the sheriff? And now there's a riot. There's just a lot of overlap in between these two things. I like to describe it as they're relatives. They're cousins, but they're those kind of cousins where you're like, wait, are they brother and sister? Are they cousins? They're always together. They look alike. What's going on? Now we have to talk about bacon. But not that bacon, this bacon. I loved the depth of whatever groan I just heard. It just touched my heart a little bit. So, I want to talk about Nathaniel Bacon because of Bacon's Rebellion that we don't call Bacon's Riot. Long story short, Nathaniel Bacon was like, the governor sucks, and let's do something about that. And I'm going to convince these people to do something about the governor because he's too nice to the Native Americans. And that's when we learned as a country, you know what? If you make a scary alien other, it will bind everyone together, whether or not I am, as a privileged person, abusing them. And so that's kind of one of the things that some people argue, the way that we think about racial identity and racial grouping kind of comes out of Bacon's Rebellion. Want to play a game? Boys and girls? No? Too bad. Who thinks that they can name U.S. states where black-white race riots did not occur? Anyone may yell out a state. Hawaii. Correct. Correct. There are about 12 of them. Yes. Yes. No. Yes. Nebraska, no. Yes. Yes. What do these things have in common? There are no black people. Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine are the ones actually. Behold. So I like to talk about this because usually somebody has something in mind when they think about race riots. Usually we think about urban centers or our southern states, and I feel like our southern brothers and sisters get a bad rap because, because that happens. Please allow me to be your race riot sommelier. What do you like in a race riot? Desegregation. That goes well with fish, because a lot of people fucking hate it. And it has been the cause of some riots. We remember George Wallace, right? Because he was like, segregation now, segregation forever. And we remember his Deep South homies, but we do not think about what was going on in Boston in 1975 and 1976 when there were basically 2 years of riots because people were like, no, do not bust the children around because never shall they mix because we think they're going to fuck and we can't have that. Do I really have to go into this one? You know, you guys knew the answer to the quiz, to the game, so I feel like I'm gonna go on ahead and skip that slide and move on to this one. In my research, I found a surprising amount of rumors at the bottom of these riots. And one of my favorite riots, which is a terrible sentence, but I do have favorites. There was a riot that happened in 1935 in Harlem. And basically what happened, this kid was in the store, in this big ass like New York City store, and he's like, that penknife from this 5 and dime, from a 5 and dime. He's like, that's gonna be mine. He got caught stealing it. Folks at the store were like, yo, this is a problem. They come and talk to him, and they're like, all right, dude, get out of here, because this is just a problem waiting to happen. Coincidentally, nearby, a hearse shows up, reporting to some other business. I don't know what it is, but the people around the store notice it, and they're like, they killed the kid. The kid is dead. The kid's dead. And the guys that work at the store are like, no, the kid's not dead, I promise. And they were like, show him. But they couldn't, because they had let him go. And because of this rumor, because of the rumor that started because of the coincidence of time and place, not to mention the conditions that made that a totally believable situation, because that's what we tend not to talk about when we talk about things like this. But a rumor starts a lot of things. There are a lot of race riots that I've read about where it's like, that black guy raped that lady, and now a riot needs to happen. In fact, there's one research source that I was using, and I wanted to get it, because I felt like there was a lot of that, because there's a lot of weird sexual stuff when you start reading about race riots. I'm going to leave that one on the... It takes a lot of restraint for me to leave a sex joke on the table. But that's not what we're here to do tonight. But I felt like I knew that there were a lot of things that had like a sexual component or a psychosexual component, and I was reading about it, and I was using an online encyclopedia, and I was like, what happens if I do a Control F for rape? And then I was like, my computer's dying. I was like, down. Alleged, down. Falsely accused, down. Alleged, down. Covering an affair, down. Oh, I think it was someone else, down. Oh, that guy gave me an STD in the rape, but they tested him and he doesn't have one, so I need to make up another story, down. I gotta stop doing this because I like smiling. People hate not having jobs. They hate it. It makes people angry. It makes people hungry. It makes them unable to find good housing. It makes a lot of things happen. But you know what people hate worse than having jobs? And I know this is going to be a real shocker. But people hate it when they don't have the job that they feel like they should have, and they think that somebody else is taking their job. And a lot of race riots kind of come down to that. You've got like a couple of groups who are competing for low-wage jobs. It's like, strike breaker. It's like, yeah, but they made half the money. Okay. They need to eat too. But there are a lot of those tensions, right? People have a lot of forces acting upon them, and it makes things a little tense. This one surprised me, though it shouldn't. Right? Like, you know the story about like an actress sticking her foot in the pool and then people being like, nope, we got to drain the whole pool. So I should not have been surprised to find that recreational space is one of the things that that really has led to a number of race riots. But when you think about it, if one of the, going back to one of the slides, like people hate desegregation. The last thing you want is people like desegregating on a merry-go-round or on a park or in a swimming pool and you don't really have very many clothes on. That's been a thing. In fact, one of the Detroit riots has to do about contested use of recreational space. The 1943 riot happened after some guys had been moved along from one place, go to another place. Some white guys and black guys are playing dice. Somebody started losing. I don't know who. Because I didn't research this one deeply, but whoever started losing thought the other person was cheating. And word spreads, right? And so like rumors, right? So people are like, man, fights are breaking out. They're on Belle Isle. People find out about it. People are waiting in mainland Detroit. That sounds so ridiculous, right? Mainland Detroit. The people are waiting. And people have ridiculous stories. There are these two parallel stories. The black folks are like, I heard the white folks threw a baby over the bridge into the water. The other folks were like, I heard the other ones threw a baby over the bridge into the water. What do you expect to happen after that? But like at the end of the day, it was about like shared space. One of my other favorite riots, because you get into these things, happened in Philadelphia, and it was a similar situation. It was about the inciting incident happened at a merry-go-round back when they were called the Flying Horses. But you had a situation where you had people living on top of each other, both sets of people, Irish and black people, not feeling like they had opportunity, feeling like they were competing, and then that competition leaked over into the recreational space. Things happened. It was terrible, yet it's my favorite. One of them. Because they're all my babies now. I kind of feel like I don't want to touch this one. Because it feels yucky right now. But people get mad when they feel like people are going to have voting rights that they feel might tip the scale. And I feel like that's all I want to say about that. You ready for a joke break? Because that was a lot, right? You know, if you're a person who, like you guys can tell, I get a little excited about history. I like to dig in, say all sorts of weird things. And if you're dating, it's terrible. Because no black man wants to date a black woman who owns multiple books about the Klan. And no white man sees a black woman with multiple books about the Klan who doesn't feel like it's a test. Luckily, my guy passed the test. So, studying race riots makes you feel a little bit like this. This is the part where we bring it all home. And we had a race riot that's about 1.5 miles away from where we are right now, and that occurred in 1970 at Pioneer High School. And it's a thing that, like, if you're in a city like Ann Arbor that, like, prides itself on being super open, having opportunities for folks, it's a thing. I was telling a colleague, like, I'm going to talk about the Ann Arbor riot, and he was like, do you want to do that? And I told my son, I'm going to talk about the Ann Arbor riot. And he was like, do you want to do that? But I just want you to know that this is the sort of thing that happens everywhere for a number of reasons, and there have been a number of historical things that have happened. And this one, the short of it is that students have been protesting, wanting to have black students were like, hey, could we get some black teachers, please? And then administrators like, of course, we will respond to all the things, because this is what, that's what happens. And then they're like, you didn't respond to the things. We will respond to all the things. And eventually it culminated in violence that occurred. Actually, the Ann Arbor District Library Archives has, if you Google Ann Arbor race riot, you could see what it looked like. It looks super crazy. It was recent, so there are people, I was talking to someone about this, and they were like, I heard more things about this riot. And I was like, I want to talk about them, but they're like totally unsubstantiated, and I just can't do that as a historian. But I just wanted to sort of talk about the history of race riots, talk about how it's connected to all the things, talk about how we need to think about it a little bit more, think about what we're thinking about when we think about race riots, and hopefully open a curiosity for 4.7 minds tonight. Thank you.
This program was recorded on July 19th, 2018 at Live, 102 South 1st Street, Ann Arbor, Michigan.